Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is the video you've been waiting for your whole life. The 10 definitive rules of crowdfunding. No rules came before this, no rules should come after this. These are the only 10 rules you will ever need, and if it sounds like I'm taking myself way too seriously, don't worry, I don't actually take myself that seriously. More specifically, these are 10 generic things that I find that I have said so many of these things again and again and again when covering crowdfunding games. And it got to a point that I decided, why not do a video of like 10 rules is a bit of a strong word, although I probably will title the video 10 rules for crowdfunding, but 10 things that I personally believe in, I guess. 10 things that I will keep in mind when I'm looking at crowdfunding games to back them or not back them or whatever it is. And so these are my own personal 10 rules for crowdfunding. You might find that these apply to you as well and they might be helpful for you, in which case, great, use them as much as you possibly can. Or you might find that they're completely not relevant because you look at things differently, in which case, great, it takes all kinds of different people to make this world go round. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into my personal 10 rules of crowdfunding. Some of these are rules that should guide actions. Other these are rules that just kind of things to keep in mind. They don't necessarily, I guess they should in some way impact actions, but it's more about a rule of something that should be, as opposed to one might be a rule of something you should do. But again, shoulds should be taken very, very liberally. This is just me and my opinions. Use them for what they're worth. We're going to go ahead and start off with number 10. And the first bunch of these are honestly going to be about reasons to not back games, which I've covered in other videos in different ways, but we're going to start off with rule number 10. If you can't afford not to get it, don't back it. This should be intuitive to many of you. It should be already known to most of you, but it might not be, especially if you're new to crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is not a guarantee. Now, note, I'm not saying crowdfunding is not a store. Crowdfunding is definitely a store. At least most of the board game projects that you are backing are basically a store in all practical implementations of what they do. Sure, you're bringing a project to life, you're helping a creator, small or large for that matter, but ultimately you are still being promised a product, so it is not a store in a typical sense, but it's certainly a pre-order system. You give money, you get the thing, that's the goal, that's the understanding, and when you don't get the thing, you're not like, oh, well, whatever, I was just supporting a creator. You're like, no, where's my thing? Or at least most people are. Crowdfunding is absolutely a store, a pre-order system to be specific, but that said, it still is a pre-order system with risk. The nature of the difference between a pre-order of, hey, I'm giving you money for this thing I'm getting in 2 months, versus I'm giving you money for this thing that hasn't even been created yet, there is a higher degree of risk in that category. And while tabletop games are one of the safest categories in crowdfunding, if not the safest, it has one of the lowest failure rates, they do incredibly well, it is well managed and well done for the most part, failures still do exist. If you can't afford not to get the game, don't back the game. I'm not saying don't expect the game. You should expect it. I expect it. We all expect it. But I'm saying that if that 2% of the time that something goes wrong and you find your $500 pledge isn't showing up and you're not getting anything for it, those kind of failures have happened to me. It took a long time for them to finally happen to me because I do try to pick my campaigns carefully, but it finally caught up. Things like Dirt, Mythic Games, crowdfunding campaigns that I backed and have been waiting for finally stopped showing up here or there, and they ultimately fall into the category of, well, you learn your lesson for next time. You're a little more conservative in your backing, whatever it is you're doing, but ultimately, crowdfunding is not something that is while it is a store, it's not a guarantee. If you can't afford not to get it, don't back it. Rule number 9 is going to be somewhat similar, but also, again, some of these will be known. Many of these are things you've heard me say over the years, but I say them a lot and frequently. Many of these things are things that I repeat on an ongoing basis. This one I don't know if I actually say all that often, but I do say it once in a while, which is if you need it on time, don't back it. Campaigns are great at saying, hey, you're going to get this game. It's currently September. What is it right now? It's October 2024. I think it's October 2024. Depends when you watch this video. It's October 2024. You're going to get this game in October 2025. And you're like, that's awesome. I would love to get it in October 2025. And if it showed up in February of 2026, that would be frustrating and irritating, and I'm not okay with that. In which case, don't back it. Crowdfunding is notorious for being late. Crowdfunding in general, tabletop crowdfunding, the date they give you is an estimate if all things go according to plan. When you're talking about creating a game, most things do not go according to plan. Whether it's the factories in China shutting down for New Year's, or whether it's the fact that you had a baby and you post a nice personal update about how you're behind on playtesting, whatever it is, crowdfunding has so many delays in it. The date you get on the crowdfunding page, very rarely do campaigns actually fulfill on time. It happens, and when a creator does it, it should be held almost like a badge of honor, although it is a little sad that we give people major pats on the back for merely being on time. But when the ecosystem is the way it is, you should still give those pats on the back. Creators that deliver on time are a rarity. Some creators really try to desperately do it. Some creators get 50-50. Other creators are just always going to be late. But whatever it is, if you need the game by the time listed on that page, you should not back it, because more often than not, you will not get it and you'll just find yourself frustrated. So, if you need the game by the date, don't back it. Rule number 8. If you aren't playing that type of game, don't back that type of game. This might seem intuitive. You're like, I don't like war games, why would I back a war game? But I don't even mean just whether it's a genre you don't back. I mean more than that. I mean if you do play that genre in theory. Then campaign games are going to be the biggest victim of this, the biggest villain or indicator, whatever you want to call it, the biggest example of this. But campaign games, people who back campaign games so that they can go on their shelf unplayed, and then they buy more campaign games so that they can go on the shelf unplayed, just be aware of what it is you're doing. You're continuously spending money on things with the hopeful promise of the fact that someday in the future, things will change and all those hundreds of dollars of games on your shelves will have not been in vain. Also, see later rules that will come out that should give you reason to consider not getting these things without worrying about the FOMO of what if it's never available. But in general, people do frequently back on the hopeful promise of whatever. They usually don't back outside of interests, meaning if you're not interested in war games, most people will not back war games. But if you are interested in a 4-player game, even though you rarely ever get 4 people to the table, you'll still back a 4-player game because the interest in there is there, and the practical relevance of you not actually playing those is not. You might be interested in that 8-player incredible strategy game that looks amazing, realizing that the last time you got Captain Stoner to the table was 4 years ago because you never actually have 8 players at your table. It might be campaign games. Again, those are often a good example of this. People have too many. Or it might just be too much fatigue within a system. There's only so many dungeon crawlers you can play, regardless of whether it's a campaign game or not. If you have 7 dungeon crawlers and you find yourself only playing your top 2 or 3, be very, very hesitant before you back more of those, because for you, that genre is already full and you are now spending money on something else that's just competing for limited shelf space, limited mental space for rules, and limited game time to play those games. If you find yourself not playing that type of game, don't back that type of game. And no, I don't just mean interest, I mean the other factors that get in the way as well. Rule number 7. If you didn't get it until now, don't get it now. Now, this is a very specific rule, and this refers to the concept of things that already existed that you have successfully ignored your entire life until now. The most common example would be a reprint campaign or re-implementation or bringing back a 10th anniversary edition of a game. But if a game has been in existence for a long time, whatever that game might be, and now they come out with a new version on crowdfunding, again, it might be a reprint 2 years later, it might be 7 years later, whatever it is, but it's a new version of an existing game, and you're like, you know what? That Cloudspire All-In from Chip Theory Games, Cloudspire has been around for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. How many years has Cloudspire been around? I feel like it's been a long time. However many years Cloudspire has been around, you're like, I've ignored it successfully for those past 6 years. But today I'm going all in on Cloudspire. Why? Why are you doing that? Now, if you're a new gamer to the hobby, that's a different conversation. If you didn't hear about Cloudspire until now, that's a different conversation. If your first awareness of this thing is today, that is a different conversation. But if you've been aware of this thing for so much time, and you've chosen not to get it until now, why is the crowdfunding campaign the impetus for you to get it again? And make no mistake, by the way, many of these rules, this one included, I do find myself victim of to a degree. There are many times where I get rid of a game and then they come out with a 3rd edition, I'm like, I like that game, I'm going to try it again. Why? Why did I need a new version of the game for me to spark my interest in getting it again? If I wasn't interested or thinking about it before the edition number 3, then why am I thinking about it now? We are often driven by the things that get put in front of us, but we have to recognize that logically, if we weren't chasing that thing, if we were fine and comfortable with its existence and not feeling the need to acquire it, but now there's a crowdfunding campaign and we immediately want it, we are being victim to the fact that the thing is being put in front of our faces and we suddenly want it. If you didn't get it until now, don't get it now. Rule number 6. I think we're up to rule number 6, right? 10, 9, 8, 7. Rule number 6 over here. Rule number 6. If you wouldn't buy it in a store today, don't buy it online for the fact that it might come in a year and a half, for the fact that there might be risks involved, for the fact that you're giving away money today for something you're getting in a long, long time. If you wouldn't buy it in a store today, don't buy it on crowdfunding for the future. Specifically what this means, I find that there is something weird and magical about crowdfunding, something weird and magical about not getting the thing today, in which you're willing to drop $400 on an all-in on a crowdfunding campaign, but if that exact all-in were on the table in front of you in your local game store for the exact same price, you would be more hesitant to drop that same amount of money on that same exact thing, even though you're getting it now with less risk, with less time value of money being lost. And yet for some reason, the magic of crowdfunding is, I'll get it. I'll get it. It'll be fun. It'll show up. It'll be amazing. I want this thing. I'll spend $400 on this thing. But in the store, the exact same thing suddenly seems a lot more expensive and a lot less reasonable to go ahead and buy. I don't know why that is. I don't know what it is about crowdfunding that gives that magical spark where spending money in a less efficient way with more risk whether you'll get it, and risk as to the quality of the game, how many reviews and things there are out on that much worse decision is somehow more compelling. And I don't know why that is. I can't tell you why. I can just tell you that it is. Crowdfunding has either a magic or possibly a curse. It feels more like a curse. The lack of the awareness of the consequence of your actions. That's the curse of crowdfunding. And so if you wouldn't buy that exact thing in a store today, don't buy it online. And this is not that hard to envision. Pretend, the next time you're looking at a crowdfunding campaign, to pretend that pledge that you're about to back is currently on the shelf at your local game store, and you're currently looking at it at the exact same price. Whatever it is, maybe it's a tier 2 pledge, $180, and you're looking at those 3 boxes, and you're like, $180, it's on the shelf of your game store, it has the $180 price tag right there. Would you pick it up? Would you buy it? If you don't know if you would, if you don't think you would, if you think something about the physical reality of that game and the physical price tag in front of you, that's not just some magical number on a credit card that you never have to really pay attention to, if you wouldn't get it in a store today, don't buy it online for the future. Rule number 5, something you've probably heard me say every single Monday on my 2 Back or Not to Back series, because this is one that some of these rules I say more frequently than others. This one I feel I say every single week. Rule number 5 is if the shipping plus price is more than 75% of MSRP, don't back the game. More specifically, on a crowdfunding campaign, you have the price of the pledge, whatever that price might be. Maybe it's a $60 price point. Great, no problem. They also like to list over there, hey, the official retail price is $80. It's an $80 game. You're getting it for $60. You're getting it at $75 of MSRP. Lucky you. Buy it now, back it now, get those savings. That's like an incentive for you. You're getting 25% off the price. That's incredible. Oh, by the way, shipping is $22.99, so you're actually paying $82.99. The MSRP is $80. But you're getting it for 25% off, right? Shipping is not a factor. If you wouldn't back it, not if you wouldn't, there's no if you wouldn't here. If the shipping plus price is more than 75% of the MSRP, you should not back the game. Now, there are always reasons to the contrary. There's supporting the creator. There's if you're live in a place where you don't have easy access to games. There's just not having to think or worry about it. There's many, many reasons you can give. But if in any way you're motivated by price, you shouldn't be backing a game where the price plus shipping on the campaign page is more than 75% of the MSRP. And 75% is a very specific number, because if you look at your general online retailers, most products are usually available for 70 to 80% of the MSRP, and that's not even accounting for when they inevitably go on sale as well. And so you can get most things for 70 to 80% of MSRP, and most online retailers for board games do have a free shipping threshold. If you buy, $100 or $150 worth of games, you can go ahead and get free shipping. And so assuming you're willing to bulk up your purchases in any way, shape, or form, you should be able to get most games for 70 to 80% of the MSRP on a regular day. That's not even accounting for when those things go on sales, and sales can range from dropping to as low as 50% of MSRP, sometimes even lower, but at the very least dropping to like 40%, or dropping to 60, 65% of MSRP. And so if you are willing to pay more than 75% of MSRP with the price of the campaign plus shipping today, you're basically just giving the money a year and a half in advance, with all the risks of whether you get the product, with all the uncertainty as to how good that game is, and you're doing all of that while paying more for the privilege. Again, this is not relevant if you have reasons that are contrary, such as your location that might be different and have harder access to games. It's also not relevant if there are additional crowdfunding exclusives that change the value of the equation over here. If it's 75% of MSRP, but you also get this, $15 promo pack that won't be available in retail, that does change the conversation. But I'm referring more to when it's generally apples to apples, when you're looking at something where they're promising you a price discount as the reason to back it now, and then the price discount is actually not a price discount when you take into account the price of the pledge plus shipping. So don't back a game if the price plus shipping is more than 75% of MSRP. Rule number 4. If the art or graphic design isn't good, why are you assuming the rest of the game is? I've done a full video on this subject. I'll link to it down below, but I did a full video once upon a time. I'm sure I'll do videos about it in the future because it's a particular point of crowdfunding that I personally find very fascinating and I'm very passionate about personally, which is when the art is not good, when the graphic design is not good, and I'll have a caveat in a second, why are you assuming the rest of the game is? Now, the caveat, before we get into the logic of that, the caveat is art and graphic design can be subjective. It absolutely can be. I would say to a certain extent, look at graphic design more so than art, because that I think is a little less subjective. It's still subjective, obviously it's subjective, but the way I heard it put once is there's art that is subjectively good, there's art that is subjectively bad, and then there's art that is subjectively objectively bad. Which what that basically means is sometimes we can all look at something and it's still subjective, but we can all agree that probably very few people think that's good art. And I do think we all look at crowdfunding campaigns, and there are certainly exceptions, but there are times when something just doesn't look polished enough. The art doesn't look polished enough. The graphic design does not look usable enough. And if those are the things you see on the crowdfunding page, those are the things you see. Most people can't try the game before you can actually back the game. You have to spend money on something that you're hoping is good based on whatever content you're watching, based on whatever's on the campaign page. There's a limited amount of tools to figure out whether that thing is good or not. And if your only exposure to the thing is an element that's not good, why are you willing to assume it is good in the areas you can't see? Now, make no mistake, there'll be plenty of crowdfunding games that look amazing and are terrible. And there'll be plenty of crowdfunding games that look terrible, but are amazing. But the key thing for me is if you as a creator couldn't get the things I see right, if you couldn't take the time, effort, or energy, and make no mistake, I'm sympathetic to the time, effort, and energy that it takes to do these things. Art can be expensive. Good graphic design can be expensive. But the amount of work required to make a game is also expensive or timely. The amount of playtesting you need, if you couldn't get a good graphic design on board your project, why should I assume that good playtesting was a part of your project? To me, this is not me judging you as a creator. It's hard to make a game. Lord knows I haven't yet, and I don't know if I ever will, because it's hard to make a game. But it does mean that as a consumer, if you're looking at that game, if you're trying to figure out, do I think I'll like this game? If the only thing you can actually see wasn't done well, it is a leap of faith to assume that the things you can't see were done well. So if you don't think the art or graphic design of a game is good, and again, I do mean if it's using your subjective opinion, if you think it's objectively bad. Hopefully that makes sense. It's still subjective, but at least it's not an issue of like, oh, I prefer one art style versus another. It's no, I don't know who would like that art style. And there will be someone, but if you're thinking that thought, you probably shouldn't be back in the game. Rule number 3, you don't always need to go all in. This is a hard one, especially for me, because I think I'm very much a hypocrite in this case. I think I generally find that I do want to go all in on games, and if I'm willing to not go all in, more often than not, I'm willing to simply not back either, which is illogical. So this rule, more so than the others, I don't think I follow, but I still believe in it. You don't always need to go all in, and in fact, very often you'll regret going all in. I did 2 full videos on the subject. I'll link them down below. But I did 2 full videos where I cover the types of games where I have benefited from going all in and the types of games where I have not benefited from going all in. And there are specific things for me personally that lend itself to understanding when I got my money's worth out of an all-in pledge. There's games, and it does nothing to do, by the way, how much I like the game. It has nothing to do with how much I like the game. I love Teneris Adventures, and that's a game that I do not need all the content. It is an absolute abundance of content that I will never properly benefit from. Versus I love something like, Cthulhu Death May Die, and I do find I use all the content there. Every game is different as far as what lends itself to you utilizing and benefiting from the content, but you really should start to figure out your own patterns based on the things you've backed in the past, based on the things you've gotten to the table, and based on the times where you've actually benefited from all the content you got, and start to establish the patterns for yourself. What makes it so that you benefit from that? Is it deluxified content? Is it a ton of, hours of adventure in a campaign game? Is it plug and play content where you can mix and match heroes anytime you dive into it and thus get then to try more stuff? Figure out your own patterns for what works for you and back accordingly. If you're consistently going all in and getting these giant boxes of games that you will not benefit from, you are setting yourself up for fatigue. Fatigue in terms of the space you have for these games, fatigue in terms of the obligation to play them, fatigue in terms of the cost of these games. You're setting yourself up for failure if you continuously back all in when you aren't using or benefiting from that all in. You do not always need to go all in. Figure out your reasons to and not to, and try to back accordingly. Rule number 2. If it's good enough, it will be available in the future. How it's available is always a little uncertain, but if it's a good enough game, it will be available in the future. It will be reprinted, it'll go to retail, it'll have subsequent crowdfunding campaigns. People making games do want to make money on their games. No one's going home rich, or very few people are going home rich in the board game space, but you still do want to make money. And effectively, the most work that goes into a game is the initial bringing that product to life. From there, it needs to have an ongoing life. And if it's good, it will. No one wants to stop selling something that's good. Now, how it's available in the future, that can be different. If you're looking at a CMON title, most of the stuff's going to be available at retail. They don't do a lot of reprints on their Kickstarter exclusives and all that, or GameFound exclusives now. If you're looking at most other creators, a good game will usually get a reprint and expansion at some point. It is almost always easier to put out more content for an existing fan base that liked the game than for the first time round when you don't even know what's going to happen to the game. And failures on second editions are also less. Failures are not high to begin with in the crowdfunding space, in the tabletop crowdfunding space, but they're even lesser on board game on reprints because there's less risk of how you have to develop and bring that product. You're reprinting, and there's expansion content. So sure, you have to playtest some new scenarios, some new characters, something like that, but you don't have to playtest the essential game. A lot of the things, all these hurdles you might run into as a new creator dealing with a factory, you did those round one, and you know better what to do round two. So whoever you are, the failure rate is lesser, and the ability to get games in general, reprints are going to be available for games. If you are worried about FOMO on that next campaign you're looking at, and you're like, I don't need it now, I don't need the game now, but I am worried I will never get it in the future if I don't get this today. If it's a good enough game, it will be reprinted in some way, shape, or form. And an addendum to this rule is going to be, and if you can't get those crowdfunding exclusives on, fresh the way you originally could, you might have to pay a premium on the secondhand market, but you will have a way of getting them. No one on planet Earth has ever not, I think no one has not been able to get their hands on a game they wanted. Some places pay a premium. The longest been out of print, sure, that premium will exist. But in general, if you always back things for fear of the fact that it might not be available in the future, you're currently paying a premium that is higher than just backing the occasional thing when it's years down the road and you finally decide you actually need it now. It's okay to pay for a used game and pay a little bit more than what you would have gotten years later. It's better than continuously piling up on things you don't need just because of the FOMO around it. Good games will almost always be reprinted or available in some way, shape, or form, and even on the times that there aren't, the secondhand market exists for a reason. Which brings us to rule number one, which is a very, very, very different rule than everything else we've covered here. Because all the other 9 rules are kind of around whether to back things or not, things to be mindful of as far as why you're backing or not. And rule number 10 is very, very different. Rule number 1, I guess. We're counting down. Rule number 1. Rule number 1 is remember that companies making games are made up of people who are very passionate about what they're doing and are trying their best to just make it in this space. There are just people doing their best on the other side of that game that you're interested in. It's not always easy to remember this, and it doesn't matter whether you're a small indie creator with a team of 1 or whether you're an entire company such as CMON made up of a whole bunch of employees who have to interact with you. There are people on the other side of your messages. There are people on the other side of your complaints. Even if a company is in the middle of failing to deliver games and struggling to make it work, they are still trying their best. Very, very few people in this space, if any, I don't think anyone in this space is simply trying to just take your money and run. Actually, probably are some, but very, 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 very few people are trying to take your money and run. Most are trying to deliver a good game, and they're doing so sometimes through a lot of people who are very unhappy with whatever decisions are being made. People who are up in arms about whatever new add-on there was in the campaign. People who are up in arms around the fact that the solo mode is going to be an extra $10 and part of the expansion. People who are upset that the last campaign hasn't delivered yet. There's going to be a lot of people who are very upset about one thing or another and who take to their keyboard forgetting that there's a human being on the other side of that message who has to read, process, and respond. And very often the human being is not even the person responsible for the thing that you're upset about. There's a lot of people in this space. And it's okay to want things. It's okay to feel like you're owed certain things, especially when you actually are owed. And it's okay to be upset when a company takes your money and hasn't delivered a product or is behind or seems to be launching more crowdfunding campaigns or seems to be dodging questions about where the games are and when they'll be delivered. It's always okay to insist on your own rights. I'm not trying to in any way sit there and say, oh, poor companies, they get a jail free card for anything and everything they do. Very much not so. They're accountable for their actions, they're responsible if they told you, and they have to deliver things. But regardless of what it is, just try to remember when you're communicating your dissatisfaction with anything, whatever that thing might be, try to deliver it in a way that you would want it delivered to you. Try to be somewhat mindful of this people on the other side. And again, it is a different level. If you're upset about the fact that there's not enough stretch goals in the project, that is a very different level than you're upset about the fact that your game hasn't delivered and everyone else is, and they're ignoring your emails. There are very different reasons to be upset. Treat them responsibly. There are people on the other side of the keyboard whenever you're running a campaign. Anyways, that's my 10 rules for crowdfunding, at least until the next time I decide to do a video like this, but I haven't done one like this till now, so this is probably the last one for another few years at the very least. These are my 10 rules of crowdfunding. Let me know in the comments down below what you think should be added. What's a good rule you try to live by when you're looking at tabletop crowdfunding and deciding whether to back things or how to act, behave, any of those things. Let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, I'm Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you appreciate this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.